from Councillor Spencer. Darrell, do we have any other apologies?
We do, Chair, thank you. We have a third apology from Councillor Sweet. So for the public record, Chair, whilst there's 25 non-exec members, we have 3 apologies making 22, but as we speak at the moment, we also don't have Councillors Hodgson or Kemp on the phone. So there are 20 members of the joint meeting on the call at the moment, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. The next item on the agenda is the minutes of our last meeting, which was a very lengthy meeting that concluded nearly at 4:30. Let's hope we don't have a repeat today. We're required to approve as a true and correct record the minutes of that meeting, the meeting held on the 4th of June 2020. Is there any dissent or any councillor wishes to make a comment? No? Okay, I take it that those minutes are approved. Next is urgent business. There is no urgent business being brought forward. Next is the division of agenda. There'll be no need to divide the agenda. Next, declarations of interest. Members are invited to declare any personal or disclosable pecuniary interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any items to be considered at this meeting. Nothing in the message box. I presume we can move on to the next item, which is the public forum. Public forum, Darrell, I believe there are no advance warnings of wishing to speak in the public forum. Is that correct?
That is spot on. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. The next item is the executive forward plan. That's within the agenda papers. I understand that there was no member wish to raise any matter or issue concerning the executive forward plan. That being the case, I'll move on to the next item.
Whoa. Question.
So, Councillor Mackay, you didn't submit the question? The question had to be submitted by last Friday. I'm sorry, but that was on the agenda. It clearly states that that any member wishing to ask questions must put that in writing before 5 p.m. on Friday the 28th. So I'm sorry, I can't allow a question. Okay.
Yeah, seems a bit pointless having it on the agenda if you can't ask a question, but anyway, go on.
Okay. Next is the item 8, which is the draft amended budget. Could I ask for Councillor Pearce and Lisa to introduce the paper? Once the paper is introduced, I will then ask members to raise any questions, and then after questions, we'll then move on to the recommendation. So if I could hand over to Councillor Pearce and Lisa.
Thank you, Chairman. Can everybody hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Well, in presenting this paper, I think everyone now realises the devastating effects the pandemic has had on our budget and the cumulative impacts which have caused the potential deficit of 1.313 million before the end of the financial year, unless we do something now to close the gap and hopefully balance the books for the rest of this financial year. I would like to thank everyone who attended the virtual budget workshop last week and apologise for the short timescales between that meeting and this, which meant a very quick turnaround of the Survey Monkey questionnaire and somewhat late delivery of the agenda papers as a result. On the compensating side, you all already have a good idea of the scale of the problem, and many of you, thank you, have contributed your own preferences for a solution. The conclusion of these is the summary 10 options set out in Recommendation 1. Recommendation 2 deals with unearmarked reserves. There were comments at the workshop about this is an emergency, so use the unearmarked reserves. This is to fundamentally misunderstand the purpose of unearmarked reserves. Our unearmarked reserves are set according to Sept guidance on the advice of our Chief Financial Officer, Mrs. Buckle. The purpose of these reserves is to act as a cash flow cushion in extreme circumstances and a contingency for absolutely unexpected events or emergencies. This is in the sense of an emergency from one day to another, even when it would be difficult to access money from any earmarked reserve. As a coastal district, we are always at risk from maritime events, of which catastrophic collapse of a seawall or tidal flooding are but two. We could also suffer pluvial flooding of properties in the north of the district from very heavy rain up on the moors. We could need large amounts of cash very quickly, and this is the fundamental purpose of this reserve, which we deplete at our peril. This is why the advice is to only take 200,000 out of this fund and to replenish it as soon as practicable. As a comparison, Mid-Devon, which has no coastline and an annual budget of 10.2 million, therefore slightly more than ours, has a minimum balance of £2 million in their unearmarked reserves, but they actually hold 2.251 million in that reserve. Recommendation 3 is to put all unallocated funds in any earmarked reserves under review at least until the setting of next year's budget in February. This is the only prudent way of running the Council's budget in the present circumstances, when we have no idea of what a second wave of the pandemic could do to our finances or those of residents and businesses in the district. Any amounts which have been previously agreed to be spent on approved projects from these reserves can still go ahead. Recommendation 4 is a slight change now that the purchase of employment land at Sherford is unlikely to go ahead. Other options will now be sought for this. It must be emphasised that this budget is being set amidst a good deal of uncertainty. Hopefully matters will improve and there may even be a surplus to carry over to next year. The alternative, though, is not at all appealing and may equally well happen. The agenda paper sets out the best midway for both scenarios to set a budget on the position as known at the moment. This is set out in section 3 of the report. It is anticipated funds promised from government, which will be paid in various tranches and total about 1.455 million on today's calculations, have been taken into account, though the last tranche will not be paid until May next year. Amounts may increase or decrease depending on how events turn out between now and the end of the financial year. So far, only the first tranche amount is calculated definitively. See section 315 of the report. The position for next year is as yet not at all clear and will depend on the government settlement for the next 3 years, anticipated in the autumn, but often delivered very late. The unknown contents of the devolution white paper make the contents of this settlement especially unclear, but the main unknowns are outlined in section 4 of the report. Section 5 deals with the various options members have chosen and how these have been managed to put the interim budget together. And section 6, some of the challenges presented by the present problems associated with leisure provision. These are not considered in this report and will come forward to full council later in the month. The problems associated with the collection fund are dealt with in section 8. The position and exact solutions government will allow to deal with these are not yet clear, but could have a considerable impact on future budgets depending on what is allowed over how long a period. The full impact of the pandemic on the collection fund is as yet not clear, but even small changes can have a disproportionate immediate impact on the district council's finances. So in all, I present this budget to you as the best way forward. It is not a pleasurable task at all to present it, but I would like to thank Lisa Buckle, Pauline Henstock and all the finance team for putting it together. It is, I believe, the most equitable way of moving forward, and the unpalatable choices for using reserves to balance it have been open to democratic choice by members. All in all, I commend this budget to you, and Mrs. Buckle and I are happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, members.
Are there any questions that members that wish to put to Councillor Pearce or to an officer? There's nothing in the message box. Oh yes, Councillor Brazil.
Yes, thank you, John. Yes, I was interested in the budget shortfall. It talks about we were expecting a 30% drop in income for July and August in our car parking income, and that we were going to be kept up to date with those. I just wonder if you could fill us in a bit more up to date, because I mean it only goes up to the end of June. We've obviously we're into September now. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Buckle, can you help out on that?
Yes, certainly. We're still collating the figures for August, but in terms of July, we are still experiencing at least a 30% drop in our income levels. But I will very shortly just get the exact figures from members. But yes, we haven't seen those income levels recover to the levels that perhaps we were hoping.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, I have one. Councillor Pennington.
Councillor Pennington, would you like to ask your question then, please?
Oh, yes, I will. First of all, I think I should congratulate, as Councillor Pearce has done, Lisa Butler on an excellent report, which I think in these difficult times must have been proved very difficult. And my question basically is on page 4, with regards to this formula, which I find incomprehensible, not incomprehensible, I can't support. Councils meet the first 5% losses, then the government will continue 75%, blah, blah, blah. Now, the thing is, why is this formula so more difficult for councils? I mean, why should the government not meet the lot? Has that been tested? Why are we meet the first 5% and then the government comes in for 75%? And can anybody answer that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I can answer that question. So on the 2nd of July, the Right Honourable Robert Jenrick MP did announce a comprehensive package of support for councils. The government did decide that the first 5% is deductible and the councils have to meet those amounts themselves. And the reason for that the government have given is that they have said that there is a great deal of volatility within sales fees and charges and the income received for councils, and therefore they feel that it is appropriate that councils meet the first 5% of any volatility or reduction in income from sales fees and charges themselves, and they will only reimburse councils to the tune of 75 pence in every pound once that 5% is deducted. What we have had notification of is when we complete the government return for the income compensation scheme, is we will be able to list all of our income categories by each individual category, and therefore the 5% deduction doesn't apply in totality for all the income streams. We can do that on a service by service basis. So for example, planning will have its own line. We will be able to show what our losses from planning income are, and the first 5% of our planning budget will be deducted, and then the government will meet 75 pence in the pound after that. But the reason they've said they are deducting that 5% is because they believe that councils should meet that first 5% themselves. We are putting together as South West Councils a response to the comprehensive spending review. So the government have asked for responses from councils to that, and as part of that we are lobbying the government to say we don't believe that 5% should be deducted. So we are lobbying the government for that. We are also lobbying the government to extend that income compensation scheme to next year, and to say that in 2021 we think our income streams will be similarly affected, and we feel the government should announce an extension to that, because at the moment that income compensation scheme only goes up to March 2021, and we're making the argument that actually we don't think those income streams will recover to the levels that they were prior to the pandemic by next March, and therefore we need certainty from government that a similar scheme will be in place for 21-22.
Thank you, Mrs. Buckle.
Thank you.
Councillor Smurden, you got speak, please. Is this a question?
No, it's not really a question. I'd like to propose the recommendations 1 to 4.
Okay, well, can I come on to that in a moment? Can we complete?
Chairman, I'd second that as well.
Yes. 1 second. Can we finish questions and then I'll come to the matter of proposing and seconding? Are there any more questions? No.
I have one more quick question. I am concerned about the amount of money that will be needed for leisure centres. And I think, we've got to look at that very, very carefully again, and Fusion in particular, because I think that in times like these, then the leisure centres must start to fund themselves a little bit more.
Okay. Mrs. Buckle, do you want to comment on that, or Councillor Pearce?
Only to say, Chairman, that I made it clear that Fusion is not part of this report and will be considered by full council at the end of the month.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions? No, if there are no more questions, then can I take it that the recommendation on the paper is being proposed by Councillor Smurden and seconded by Councillor Austin? Can you both confirm that that is the case?
Yes,
please?
that's the case, Chairman.
Yes. Items 1 to 4.
Okay. Before we move on to debate this, can I understand that Councillor Brazil has a proposed amendment. I think in order to start the debate, can I suggest we deal with the amendment first? So, Councillor Brazil, can you propose the amendment? Before you do you have a seconder? Yes.
Chairman, Mark Long here. I second that.
Okay, thank you. So the proposed amendment is on the screen. So, Councillor Brazil, would you like to speak to the amendment, please?
Yes, thank you, John. Yes, very, very simple amendment. Basically, we agree with the first 4. I think those are uncontentious. But after that, the amendment, I feel that we feel that the extra monies we need to balance the budget should be taken out of the unearmarked reserves. And I hear what Councillor Pearce says about the fact that this is a cash flow and, what if an emergency happens. Well, yes, it's interesting that the examples that she comes up with actually don't fall within the remit of South Hams. They are the Environment Agency or indeed the County Councillors, the Flood Authority. For example, when the Slapton Road was washed away, how much money did that cost the District Council? I ask you. And of course, we do have a marine infrastructure reserve as well, in the region of about £300,000. So, whereas I understand what you're saying, my feeling is that that unearmarked reserve is for emergencies. We're in an emergency. Let's use that money. Let's keep all our other reserves, be it for asset management, be it for economic regeneration, be it for affordable housing. Let's keep those reserves there. Let's spend it on what our communities want, and allow the unearmarked reserves to drop to still above £1 million. Thank you.
Darryl, you want to comment?
Thank you, Chair. I'm conscious that 2 members of the joint meeting, being Councillors Kemp and Pennington, are on the phone, so they won't have seen the amendment. So would it be helpful if I read it out to the meeting?
Yes, please. Yes.
So in effect, members, there's 4 parts to the recommendation which have been proposed and seconded, and there's an amendment to part 1 specifically, and that is as follows: to delete recommendation 1 and replace it with the following words: to recommend to council that the options 1 to 4 as set out in section 5.2 be agreed, totaling £433,000, and the remainder of £880,000 be taken from the unearmarked reserve in order to produce an amended revenue budget for 2020-21. And for the benefit of councillors Kemp and Pennington, that amendment has been proposed and seconded and is currently subject to the debate. Thanks, members.
Thank you very much. Councillor Long, do you want to say anything in seconding this amendment?
Thank you, Chairman. I think, as Councillor Brazil has said, there are a lot of reasons and there are a lot of reserves that could be moved around. I believe that these reserves that we've indicated should be, or the unearmarked reserves that we should be using, as Councillor Brazil has said, should be used. We shouldn't be using the reserves which are there for affordable housing, for business support, regeneration. We should be spending those as we have indicated that we would like to. And I think it is an emergency. The COVID situation does mean that we require to spend money, that we need to cover all of this. And I believe to bring the 880,000 from the earmarked reserves is the most appropriate way to do this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I have Councillor Taylor down to speak. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I can't believe that somebody would want to take money from the unearmarked reserves when we got a financial team there that's worked very hard to find the allocation to bridge the gap from other sources, because in a minute we're going to find, because this is going to be an ongoing thing, it's taken years to build up a reserve and they can easily be spent. I don't believe that we should drop this below 1.5, and I would like to see it even higher than that, because in a minute we're going to have a real emergency without any fallback, whereas at the moment our financial team, and it's supported by the Chief Executive, that they found a way of bridging the gap without interfering with our unearmarked reserves. And I believe that it should stay as it is. And we've been recommended by the finance team to keep it at 1.5 minimum. And I would like to support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Austin.
Yeah, Chairman, I'd just like to support what Councillor Taylor just said, actually, that the whole purpose of these unearmarked reserves is to keep them there for an absolute emergency. Now, it isn't beyond possibility that we could have some event like flooding, for example, which would be immediate and very expensive and could be urgent, and we might need something, in addition to what we have at the moment. But I think what we also need is guidance from the officers on here, because I think if we are seriously looking at reducing the unearmarked reserve below 1.5 million, then I'm not entirely sure that the officers would recommend that we do that anyway. And I think we should also take, their view on this as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Holway. Councillor Holway.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, members, we have a duty to keep this council as a going concern as councillors, to provide services to residents and indeed to keep the jobs of our officers. We're already in this emergency. The only earmarked reserves are very much for unexpected, unknown emergencies. There's a fair bit of experience gone in the past from the kind of levels they should be maintained, and the level we're looking at between 1.5 and 2 million is considered about right for this organisation. Something that springs to mind that someone said to me a long time ago: just as you thought nothing else could go wrong, it did. I think We should keep the unearmarked reserves to keep this council as a going concern, with a view to building the reserves back up and looking at what we want to do with our earmarked reserves as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I wouldn't be able to support anything that sees our earmarked reserves be reduced below 1.5 billion. To be honest with you, I'd prefer to keep it up around 1.7 million at least. Councils like ours rely on cash flow and having cash in the bank to act in the event there are significant emergencies, be that flooding, be that freak weather events, things like that, where we can be on the ground as soon as possible to support communities, particularly for things like flooding. So I think that the officers have come up with a very good measure for this, which keeps the council fairly on an even keel, and I'm afraid I couldn't support any measure that would take the reserves down any further, and I will be supporting the original recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Smurden.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. The amount which is being talked about is a huge percentage of these reserves to be spent in one go. I obviously don't want to support it. Members and officers have worked hard over the last week, 10 days or so to balance, to come up with a balanced budget and to spread the load across all the financial options which we've got available to us, and to my mind, that is by far the more sensible way of going about it, rather than taking one huge hit on these reserves. I wonder if it's feasible for Mrs. Buckle to give us her opinion on this amendment. I mean, it is quite a major change to what is being proposed, and I would like to hear Mrs. Buckle's opinion on it if she is able to give it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Foss.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I've been listening to the debate, and I mean, I've looked at all the paperwork, but I still go back. I understand where Councillor Brazil and Councillor Mark are coming from, but we have probably one of the best 151 officers in the southwest of England, if not in the country. Over the years that I've been a councillor, she always seems to pull the rabbit out of the hat when we find ourselves in a difficult spot, and I will always listen to her and what she has to say. And I think that at the moment we are in a very difficult position with this COVID-19. But I would say that's a slow burner emergency. It's going to go on and on and on. What these other funds are for is something that hits us like a ton of bricks. You go to bed at whatever time you go, wake up the next morning and all hell is broken loose. And I would be very nervous about spending that amount of money out of our unearmarked reserve. So I should be supporting Mrs. Buckles and the team's suggestions for our budget in the future, and I can't accept this recommendation, although I do understand where they're coming from.
Councillor Mackay.
Hi, thank you. I think, I mean, this is more of a question for Mrs. Buckle, really, but it would seem to me that there is unallocated reserves of 900,000 elsewhere. I mean, distributed across all the pots. I mean, these various reserves are somewhat academic, and I don't believe that running down the unearmarked reserve is necessarily putting any of these other things in danger. There is porosity between these pots of money, and if need be, the monies can be reallocated, and it seems sensible in the first instance to use the unearmarked reserves, because it is an emergency fund and we are in an emergency in the end. And I'd also, as I put in the comments there, draw people's attention to the fact that at the end of this year we are about to crash out of the EU, which I imagine is also going to have a huge effect on the council in terms of its ability to get revenues and its receipts from business rates, etc. So I think it makes sense to concentrate closing this gap on the unearmarked reserve. So I'll be supporting this amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. What we're talking about here is messaging. I don't know how many physical bank accounts we have, possibly only the one. The money can be moved as and when we wish. What we're doing here is saying that we are in an emergency, we need to use the money for an emergency, and should something catastrophic happen, we still have over £1 million in reserve. Not only that, we have all these other pots from which you're wishing to extract money at the moment. But when you do that, you'll be saying that those particular issues are not worthy of support anymore. And I believe they are. I believe we should keep on going with these issues which we have decided over the years, prior to my time of course, are worthy of supporting our residents, and the reserve is there to help with a catastrophe. The government calls this current state an emergency, and should a second one occur, should the consequences of Brexit ruin this country, well, we will be pulling all the elements in from the other pots, as you are intending to do now, we will do then. It is quite clear that you should be sending the message to your residents and your voters that you understand that you will keep this council going as best you can and right to the last minute, and use reserves for the purpose for which they are designed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Right. Thank you. I've listened to the debate and the amendment to our recommendation, and I feel that to take money out of the unearmarked reserve is a folly, because we employ financial officers, and our chief executive have all agreed with the recommendations. They have set them up in cooperation with the leader and her team, and if we don't listen to advisors, there's pointless as having them. You don't go to a solicitor or accountant and ask them for best advice and then do something completely different. I understand where the recommendation or the proposed amended recommendation is coming from, but if we've got means of filling gaps before we hit on that, then I think that's what we should do. We have we do need to keep our unearmarked reserves at least 1.2 million. I can remember when I first got on the council, we had to keep them at about 1.8 million, even in those days. So I think we should not be using our unearmarked reserve if we've got means of filling the gap and proceeding without taking that into account. So I will be supporting the original recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I've got no more requests to speak, although I have received a request, or two requests, that Mrs. Buckle give her opinion. Can I just say, Mrs. Buckle has clearly set out her position in the report of which she is the author, and that has been to a certain extent reinforced by Councillor Pearce. There is a debate between members, and I think it would not be right to introduce or seek to ask an officer to participate in the debate. So if there are no more,
we want her advice, Chairman. We don't want her to take part in the debate. We want her.
Councillor Smurden, her advice, and is in the report, and there was an opportunity for members to raise questions on the report, and there were questions on the report, and I don't think it would be right to seek to ask an officer to participate in what is a debate between members. So you have Mrs. Buckle's advice. It's clearly set out in the lengthy report. So unless we have anybody else wishes to speak, I think we'll move to the vote. Mr. White, do you want to conduct the vote, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. So members, this will obviously be done by named vote in alphabetical order. On the amendment only, we have 21 members of the joint meeting on the call. Members in alphabetical order. Councillor Abbott.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Austin.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor Birch.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Brazil.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor Chown.
Against.
Councillor Foss.
Against.
Councillor Holway.
Against.
Councillor Jackson.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Long.
For.
Thank you, Councillor McKay.
For.
Thank you, Councillor O'Callaghan.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Panel.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Pennington.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor Pringle.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor Reeve.
Against.
Councillor Rose.
For.
Councillor Rowe.
Against.
Councillor Smurden.
Against.
And Councillor Taylor.
Against.
Thank you. Thank you, members. That is therefore 10 members in favour of the amendment with 11 members against, and that amendment is therefore declared lost. Thank you, members.
Hooray.
Okay, thank you, Mr. White. If we could now move on to the recommendation that's on the paper. Councillor Smurden, Councillor Austin, do you want to speak to the recommendation?
No, Chairman, just propose it. Thank you.
Councillor Austin?
No, Chairman, just propose it.
Okay, is there any member wish to speak on the recommendation that's on the paper, or shall I move to the vote?
Move the vote, Chairman.
Okay. Okay, in that case, we'll move to the vote. Mr. White, do you want to proceed with the vote on the recommendation on the paper?
Thank you very much, which is also on the screen, Chair. So once again, members, in alphabetical order, Councillor Abbott.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Austin.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Birch.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Brazil.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
For.
Okay, Councillor Chown.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Foss.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Holway.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp.
Against.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Long.
Against.
Councillor McKay. Councillor McKay.
Sorry, against.
Thank you, Councillor O'Callaghan.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor Panel.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor Pennington.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Pringle.
For.
Councillor Reeve.
For.
Councillor Joseph Rose.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Smurden.
For.
And Councillor Taylor.
For.
Thank you. Thank you, members. That's therefore 13 votes in favour with 8 against, and that motion is therefore declared carried. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. White. If we could now move on to the next item on the agenda. 1 second, I'll get my papers. Which is the item 9, the coronavirus recovery and renewal plan. Can I just inform members as to how I propose we deal with this? Is that if first I will ask Mr. Powell and Councillor Pearce to introduce the report. And in introducing the report, they will not touch on the Appendix 1, the theme. That will be dealt with following the discussion on the report. So first we'll deal with the report. That will be introduced, as I said, by Mr. Powell and by Councillor Pearce. After we've had questions and any comment on the report, we'll then move to Appendix 1, and we will go through each theme in turn. If there are any proposed amendments to the theme, then we will deal with those when we discuss the particular theme. After dealing with the theme, we'll then turn to the recommendation on the paper, and there are some proposed amendments to the recommendation. So if I could start by asking Councillor Pearce to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to split this up strictly according to what you've just said, because I hadn't been warned that that's the way you were going to present it. So I have got something prepared here, and I shall say it as it comes. But in fact, there isn't an awful lot on Appendix 1, because Appendix 1 is just reporting what people wanted to do at the workshop. So I'm not sure how that can be amended now, because that is the report from the workshop. But anyway, I'll start. The main challenge of the recovery programme is to take a strategic approach and to understand fully the challenges we face, so that South Hams District Council can emerge as an organisation that is fit for purpose and, above all, financially stable in the new normal. Following the workshops, and your suggestions for action have been collated in the draft recovery plan appendix at the end of this report, the next step is to determine the best way to implement or to develop the proposals to fit in with the Council's strategic objectives. So far, all suggestions from the workshop have been included, but the lists will need to be prioritised in terms of impact and cost, and therefore rationalised. Also, so far the executive have not had their input to the action. The executive have not had their input to the actions, though officers have had an opportunity to make some significant suggestions about operational organisation. These last two categories will also have to be considered. The staff establishment has been reviewed, and one of the objectives will always be to retain valued officer capacity, but to concentrate on a multi-skilled and flexible workforce so that we can move personnel to where the demand for work is within the organisation. Since the emergency started, this last quality has proved to be the making of it, an adaptable, agile workforce that can turn itself to sorting out whatever problem comes up. We cannot influence the course of the pandemic, but we can provide an effective response to its demands and the need to keep the district's economy turning over to best effect and supporting residents as well as we can in the ever-changing environment. Officers have learnt valuable lessons from the first phase and have made effective organisational changes should there be a second wave. These are broadly listed in section 4 of the report. The member actions listed range from individual actions to higher level strategic actions with a range of timescales for achieving them. What is clear is the world we are going into is not the same as it was before the pandemic. We have seen intense pressure on services caused by a much larger than usual influx of visitors and a huge increase in dependence on benefits due to the lack of available work or, even worse, unemployment. There are a number of people who have fallen between the stools as far as benefits and grants are concerned, often through no fault of their own, but our officers are always there to help anybody who comes forward and point them in the direction of benefits if they're available, and they have an emergency fund if they aren't eligible. You will see a narrative to accompany two of the main themes, business and communities, which are set out in the report. Much of the business action will be headed up by Team Devon, which, as well as an alliance of all the districts and the County Council, includes many partner organisations which can help deliver. There is a footnote setting this out in the appendix on page 33. The County Council has written a very comprehensive business recovery plan as part of this initiative, and the Devon Carbon Plan is also part of it. As key elements of the development of key themes, a number of task and finish groups have been set up, and the successful delivery of the plan will depend on these groups being effectively led and strategic in their recommended outcomes. Finally, the report summarises the budget challenges contained in detail in a separate report on this agenda. The Joint Committee's task today is to agree the actions in the appendix and to send this report forward for consideration by the Executive, following which it will come back to the Joint Committee on the 19th of November in a more polished form for consideration. Thank you, Chairman.
Any members got any questions? Councillor Pannell, you've got a point of order.
Yeah, it's a minor quibble, but it is an important one. Have we given up punctuation? Because I'm disturbed to see that we're not using apostrophes, because one, note the councils should have an apostrophe after the L. I'm only saying this because at times when we're going to be working with other councils from time to time, when we have reports talking about us working with West Devon or with Devon, the lack of apostrophe does not make it clear whether we're talking about one individual council or a number of councils, and I think it's sad that we're not using the right punctuation. I think the same occurs later in the paper.
Could I ask that to be noted and dealt with accordingly, please?
Already done, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, are there any questions or comments on the report? Just the report, not the themes? No? In that case, if we could move to the first theme, which is theme 1, which is business and economy. Councillor Pearce and Mr. to say anything at all on this? Perhaps in addressing members, could you provide some information, more information on the involvement of Team Devon? They feature in many of the proposed actions in this theme. I wonder if you could explain how that is going to operate and how they're going to instigate the plans, and how it's going to be taken forward as far as this council is concerned. And also, could you amplify the term business forums? I mean, if you could inform members on those two matters, as well as any other matters that you wish to inform members on, please do.
Thank you, Chairman. My understanding on business forums is that Councillor Bastone and Chris Brook are presently talking about setting up a number of forums under various headings suited to the main themes of businesses in our area. And they will be trying to get business leaders together to find out exactly what their problems are and how we can help. That's the first thing. I stand to be corrected if that's not correct. And as far as Team Devon goes, I think if you would allow our Chief Executive to speak on this, I think he probably has the best handle on exactly what it is, because it's a term which covers a loose organisation of, first of all, the county council and districts, but also a number of other organisations which have been working together through the pandemic, and which have a good understanding of what the problems are and how to carry the problems to solve the problems and carry things forward. And I think it's been very useful that we are all working together, because actually we can produce a lot more capacity between us than we could individually. But if you will allow Andy Bate to speak, I think it would be good at this point.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got Councillor Baston said that he would like to speak, so perhaps I could ask Councillor Baston to speak, and then ask the Chief Executive to then deal with your request. So, Councillor Baston.
Thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, Mr. Brook is not here with me today, but he's away at the moment. But I just wanted to say that he and I have not been idle since this report was commenced. We've already had the pop-up business school, which was to help those who wanted to set up the business, and we had in excess of 40 people take up that opportunity. We've also written out to town council, the 6 town councils, and we're trying to set up meetings with them, chambers of commerce, and those important people in business in the South Hams, and we're going to have a series of meetings to try and put together a program of what we can do to try and improve the business for South Hams businesses, and that will take in items 1.2, 1.3 and 1.4. So we're not sitting on our hands. We have actually been doing something, and we're going to continue with that work. Thank you, Chairman.
Can I just to clarify then, when it states business forum, is this going to be a formal body that you're going to come at a later date with a proposal as to how it's constituted, or is this just a loose arrangement along the lines that you've just mentioned?
Well, until we've had those discussions with local chambers of trade and local large employers and town councils, we're not going to set out anything. We want to work together with these people to try and make things happen.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bates.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, so the word Team Devon really is a shorthand term, and probably we should have made a better explanation of it in the report, so apologies to members for that. It really just refers to a set of working relationships involving principally the County Council and the 8 district councils across Devon. So there are regular meetings, as you would expect, in a 2-tier area as ours, including a regular meeting of leaders and chief executives, which is chaired by the county leader and happens on a 2-weekly basis. But there are also a range of other meetings which, as you would expect, we are involved in and convened by the county, including around the work on economic development, which is referenced in the report, and also the arrangements for responding to the COVID crisis. It's a short term, and apologies for that, Chairman, but it really references a whole range of relationships and meetings and conversations which are going on between us as a district and other districts and the county, and indeed other organisations involved in those processes. So nothing particularly mysterious, but it doesn't have any form other than those sets of relationships. Thank you, Chairman.
Can I just ask a question then? Is that looking at the action plan, there are 23 items within the action plan that where Team Devon instigate the action as such, and if you go on to Devon County Council's website and seek to get information about Team Devon, there's very, very little there. And it seems to me, from what you have explained, it's a very sort of loose arrangement. And so it's worrying that this loose arrangement is actually responsible for instigating 23 items within our action plan. I mean, I think that may give concern.
If I could respond, Chairman, I think it's our terminology which is the looseness in this, not the arrangements themselves. And what we can do, I think, is to go through the plan and provide a bit more detail for each of those which we've loosely termed under this generic Team Devon term, in order to provide some further clarity as we go forward. So it's the use of that term Team Devon which is the error, if there is one within the report, rather than the fact that there are relationships in place, which there clearly are, and those are going to be ones that we can build on and use as part of our recovery planning process, Chairman.
Thank you. Drew, you would like to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to sort of echo a little bit what Andy said there. I mean, what we've tried to do is put this action plan, put some meat on the bone. There was a lot of information came forward from the workshops, and this first iteration is trying to determine what the best vehicle is for delivering on those specific actions. There's a range of business as usual, there's some operational work there, and so the Team Devon term has been used to pull out and especially identify where work is already being progressed by, for example, the enterprise, the economy prospectus. But also, on the right-hand side, the sort of responsible team group strategy column. We try to find a relevant home at this stage. And in terms of business forums, that may well change depending on the output of the work that Councillor Bastone and Mr. Brooke are doing with the business community. And also just to clarify the term recovery management team, which has been raised by a member and officers with me, that is a catch-all for where we haven't determined the appropriate officer to progress that work. It points to generally operational activity, and that will end up with a sort of named officer or team going forward. So, as I say, it's the first iteration. We try to point things in the right direction. Where work sits under an existing strategy, for example, it seems appropriate to put it there, because not everything that came forward from the workshops is about recovery. Some of it is business as usual. Some of it is more ambitious in terms of new priorities. And we tried to group together those new priorities into member-led task and finish or working groups to develop those proposals further. So, as I say, it's the first iteration, and there will undoubtedly be changes as this develops.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Rose, you have a question.
Thank you, Chairman. There have been a number of comments, not necessarily just in this meeting, but in the beginnings of the preparation for recovery, about the importance of a green recovery. And I know that there are some aspirations of this council to take whatever steps we have available to us within this recovery process to tie in with our sort of ever-forming green strategy, our climate and biodiversity strategy. And I'm just wondering if we could have a bit of an update, whether from Andy Bates or Drew Powell or whoever has the answer to this, or just to how that's going and how that aspiration is being put into actuality, and sort of how we're going to start to see the actions coming from all of the planning that's been happening start to take form in this recovery process, and as to how much priority that's being given. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Bates or Mr. Powell, who's going to answer that?
Mr. Powell, if you could answer. Thank you, Chairman.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair. I think so. What we're trying to do with the specific actions that have come forward is, as I said earlier on, is to sort of align those with the climate change and biodiversity strategy and include those within that sphere of work. I mean, clearly it's for members to determine the priority of these specific actions. We can only do a certain amount as an individual authority, and again, I would suggest that the Devon Carbon Plan will drive a lot of the wider green initiatives in terms of infrastructure and so on. But then on a smaller scale, our accommodation strategy, our ways of working, will all be pushing towards benefits from a carbon perspective. So it is still work in progress, Chair. And the next working group of the next climate change and biodiversity working group will be looking at pulling those actions into the action plan and then determining the priority of those with respect to others that are already in there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I've got Councillor Hodson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very sorry I came late to the meeting. There was a bit of a disaster with an electrical wire that had to be fixed. I'll say no more. I just wanted to really bring in this, as just picking up a little bit from what Councillor Rose was saying, but I was aware of it myself, that we've done a lot with partnerships, and I think there's been a huge amount of learning in those partnerships over the last few months, where obviously at the community level there's a huge amount going on. And one of the things that we are aware of is that there's been quite a lot in terms of partnership, in terms of investment in renewable energy. And I apologise for not being here for the last item on the agenda, because I wanted to actually be here for that, but I just couldn't. But I do think there's an opportunity for investment working with partnerships, and I think I would see that in sort of in the whole economic element of how we could maybe start to work with other partners in terms of producing renewable energy in the South Hams. It's a huge deficit. But I'm aware that obviously there's an issue around some of the linkages and how much renewable energy is being produced. But for example, with fusion, there was an offer made some while ago in discussion, and it was very clear that that can actually assist working with our leisure centres. It gives a good model, but it also could potentially give us an income. So I think energy is only ever going to get more expensive, and since it's would be really clearly underpinning our sort of clear directive in working towards on the climate emergency, I think that could be really worth exploring. And I can't really see how it would fit in here. I mean, there's talk about EVs and things, but not really that actual production. Thank you.
Okay. I've got a proposal. There's a proposal on the screen from Councillor Abbott, and I'll ask him to speak to the proposal that's on the screen, and it concerns 1.5 of the first theme. So, Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. Yes, and in responding to Judy's last chat comment, this was raised at the time of the discussion, but I maybe didn't explain it well enough. And for those who would like to read more widely, can I encourage you to look at a website, www.excludeduk, that's one word, excludeduk.org. What we have here are business people who are being disadvantaged because they are not yet included in government support packages. And to read from that website, while government support packages have provided much needed support for many, there remain some 3 million taxpayers, 10% of the UK workforce, who find themselves excluded from meaningful support. Now, of course, there's not 3 million in our district, but it does include, we do have here new starters, those in between jobs or due to start new jobs after the 19th of March, those denied furlough, and there are others I won't carry on. They're on the website. What I'm suggesting is just a small amendment. It's a bit hard to, you can see there that I put 1.5. That's the easy bit, column 3 and column 4 and A and D. Partly I'm trying to fight with the layout on this screen. If you're looking at theme 1, yes, get my mouse over to this. Theme 1 at the moment, and you can see 1.5. If you go to the right, the first in the next column, it starts A, capacity of the place and enterprise team, and the screen's gone blank. I think then if you go to the right once more on your theme, you'll see A, review of existing roles, B, hold sector, C, re-establish business forums, and I shall go to my own computer since it's gone. Excuse me while I locate it here. I'm suggesting under that A, B and C in that column to add this change, to identify and support taxpayers who currently find themselves excluded from meaningful support. In other words, we should be looking to help our residents who may not be in the mainstream of employment and of business, but are intrinsically those in early business startups or just changing at the moment that they were caught by this disaster. And we, to the extent that we can, because I understand it's government funding, but we should be doing what we can to look after these people. And I think just this small element will encourage that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Pearce and Mr. Powell, do you have any strong objections to this being included within the plan?
Chairman, I would say that any government money we have to give out to businesses or individuals, excuse me, is very strictly regulated by government, and we can only give it out to the categories that have been identified by government. Now, we do also have an emergency fund, and I know that we have been giving out amounts to people who are in distress because they are not reached by any of the government grants. And for various reasons, they're not eligible for any further grants or benefits.
But is there any reason why the proposal can be? Is any reason why it shouldn't be included in the plan? Bearing in mind that this is an outline.
Well, I think what I am trying to say is that as far as identify goes, it is up to people who are in distress to come to us. I don't know otherwise how we could identify people, because we don't hold in and records, and we don't know who these people are unless they identify themselves to us. And as far as supporting them, we do not have any government money to support them if they are not eligible for benefits. And all we have are emergency funds. We have our own emergency funds, and we have an emergency fund that was given to us by the County Council right at the beginning of the pandemic. I don't have a precise figure of how much is left in that fund, but I believe there is money there. So what I'm saying is that I think it would be, if we do include it, I don't know what we can do about it. So on that basis, you need to decide whether it's worth adding.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Austin.
Yeah, I'd just like to say a couple of things, Chairman. The first is I think we already have emergency funding for this already, but I also think it would be appropriate for us to receive advice from an officer on it. I thought it was appropriate on a previous amendment that was put forward that we receive advice from an officer, and you actually stopped the officer from giving us advice on it.
No, I didn't.
And I don't think that was actually the right thing to do at the time. I think if we have amendments and proposals put forward, we should be able to go back to officers and ask for their advice on it, not actually stop them from giving us the advice that we need. Because I think on this particular amendment, we actually have emergency funding already that is in place.
Thank you. With respect, Councillor Austin, I did not stop any officer speaking. So, Councillor Rowe.
What?
Thank you,
Councillor
Chairman.
Rowe. You did.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, yes, I think you did. You wouldn't bring Mrs. Buckle in when she was asked, or when it was asked if we could have her opinion on a matter. But however, that's passed. We're speaking about business and economy and recovery. Now, to bring in emergency measures, whatever, for individuals. There were individual small businesses, people very often working on their own, who didn't qualify for any of our grants that were given out because they didn't have their paperwork in order. They hadn't got their accounts up to date, and they couldn't provide us with all the information that we needed. So I think actually the onus was on them to get their paperwork correct so that we could then enable them to receive some grant funding. You know, it's, if they can't provide us with the correct paperwork, then we can't give them any funding. It's as simple as that, really.
Okay. Councillor Pannell.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I think Councillor Rowe misses the point that this is not for people who didn't get their paperwork in order. These are people who have been consciously excluded from any help, as Councillor Abbott said. Particularly those small businesses, for example, who pay themselves by way of dividend rather than a salary, those who've recently changed their employment status, quite a number. I think as far as identify, well, even by helping advertise the fact that we can support people and that there is financial help available for those in distress, would satisfy the identify part of this, and I agree with Councillor Abbott. I'd second this.
Thank you. Mrs. Buckle, you've asked to speak. Would you like to speak, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, in response to Councillor Abbott's question, I can outline the support measures already in place and how we are also lobbying government on this. So with regards to Team Devon, which is all the Devon councils, we are making the case to government for a recovery prospectus that's got a clear set of ambitions and opportunities to provide a stronger, inclusive and sustainable economy. That prospectus, which we are lobbying government on, sets out how Devon wish to work with the government to co-invest an initial 50 million three-year recovery package of support. And the proposal is for the remaining 37 million of grant funding. This is unspent funding from the business grants, for councils to be allowed to retain that locally locally and be aligned with local resources from partners and local allocations of things like national schemes, funding from the LEP and local authority budgets. The Team Devon's recovery perspectives does focus on securing support and delivering relief in 4 core areas. Those are our businesses, our places, our people and our opportunities. Members will be aware that other areas that we've been able to offer support has been the discretionary scheme for business rate grants. So that scheme was particularly targeted at businesses who missed out on any funding through the initial business grants. So far we have paid out 1.4 million to 310 businesses under that discretionary scheme. Final payments have to be made by the end of this September, when our total government allocation of 2.3 million for the scheme will have been paid out in support for businesses. We are also working with Business Information Point for them to provide advice for our businesses as well. In terms of financial support for our residents, the council tax support scheme has meant that over 3,500 claimants in South Hams have received the £150 reduction in their council tax. That was funded by utilising the council tax support hardship funding, which the council received from the government, and that totalled £500,000. And as part of that council tax support scheme, we recognised that we needed to help our self-employed residents that had seen their business and income affected by COVID. And in response to that, we stopped the minimum income floor being applied on a case-by-case basis, thereby by treating their business as a new business that had just been set up, and that allowed us to calculate their income on true figures, and in the majority of those cases that would have been nil income. Other things we've been doing as support we've been providing is around signposting claimants to make a claim for universal credit where appropriate. We've also been offering money advice referrals through Homemaker, and we are referring around 7 cases a month to Homemaker, and since May 25 households have been able to recoup £22,000 in benefits, and that's either from we've been able to advise them that they've been underclaiming or advising them to put a new claim in, and we will continue to lobby our MPs and our government on these issues. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Holway.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, bearing in mind all the stuff we do and the good work our officers have been doing to help all sorts of people, I wonder if there is any more we can do to help complete sort of information loops. It may be something worth noting. I'm sure we're already doing it, but it might be something that's just worth bringing up and mentioning that, you know, we are actively attempting to close any loops, to point people in the right direction, and just to make those points. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Abbott, would you like to summarise and sum up, and then I think what there's clearly a divide amongst us, so then we'll move to the vote as to whether or not this is included within the plan. So, Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. I think it's such a shame that people are misunderstanding. Councillor Rowe's response was about those who didn't provide the correct paperwork. This is not what the issue is. Mrs. Buckle's response was about all these good things which we are doing. This is not the point of Excluded UK. This is about business people who might have gone on maternity, parental or adoption leave. This is about people who are on PAYE, freelance, short-term contracts, and they just are not included. They're not. It's not about getting the paperwork right. It's looking after people. I said residents. I meant business people who are resident in our area, our own people. It's about looking after them when they're in a problem. And this small addition, what it would do, identify. Well, identify, yes, it would be advertise and give them the opportunity to come in. You're not sure what we could do, Councillor Pearce? Well, it seems that there is an emergency budget for this. So we could do something. We could look after these people. We'd have to be careful. Of course, all the corollary ideas around careful management of against claimants and false claimants. But this list of these people in a catastrophic situation because they've not been applicable to get any money at all. This is looking after business people. This is something which should be at the forefront of almost all of your minds on one side of this divide. So I can only implore that you include this and I hope send a message to the people in our district who are struggling.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce, I really think that we have covered it. I think the easiest thing to do is to put this to the vote because there's clearly a division. I think the issues have been set out and are clear. So if you don't mind, I would go to the vote on this. 1 second. I see that Drew Powell, you said you want to comment.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if Councillor Pearce was before me.
Councillor Pearce, do you want to say a quick word on this before we move to the vote?
Thank you. It's really only, Chairman, on this point of identify, because I don't know how we would identify these people or how we could identify these people because we don't hold the right information to be able to do that. But I do know that, as Mrs. Buckle has outlined, our officers are ready and waiting to help anybody who applies to the council with anything they can to help those people who apply to the council. Now, Mrs. Buckle's given you a long list of what all those means are, plus the emergency funding. We have myriad ways of advising people, but they need to self-identify. And I can't see any point in advertising because I think everybody knows that if you're in trouble, you go to the council and the council will offer any help it can, or that it has available to help. So it's the identify part that I have a problem with because we just cannot identify these people.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Powell, do you want to comment still?
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, the Team Devon prospectus, I hate to go back to that, but the work that's been pulled together by all the partners in Devon is still an evolving document. And a key part of that is lobbying central government. So it would be an appropriate way to look at something where there is a gap, which has been identified by Councillor Abbott and recognised by members, to push that lobbying was done at that level, which may influence the overall position in terms of support. So that might be an option moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Mr. White, there is a proposed addition to the action plan. Can we, 1 second, I keep having officers wanting to speak. Mr. Molyneux.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just trying to sort of potentially avoid a vote here. And I think everybody's agreeing pretty much with the sentiment of Councillor Abbott's suggestion, and I agree with Councillor Pearce. I think the identify bit is the problem. If it just said support taxpayers who currently find themselves excluded from meaningful support, then I think there wouldn't be any sort of need for a vote. And I just wanted to suggest to Councillor Abbott whether he would be happy with that based on the debate and what sort of Mrs. Buckle has outlined in terms of support.
Yes.
So, Councillor Abbott, can you just confirm that you're prepared to delete the reference, sorry, not reference, the wording identity and support? In other words, it starts support taxpayers.
Yes, I'm prepared to do that.
Right. If that is the case,
yeah.
Rather than
seconder, I'm happy with that too.
Thank you very much indeed. Rather than go to the vote, is there any member who does not wish to support this? If that is the case, then we'll move to the vote. Would you indicate in the message board whether or not you're not willing to support this? Okay.
For the purpose of the live stream, Chair, I can't see anyone indicating a wish to not support that
proposal. So that will be added to the plan, yes?
That's correct, Chair.
Right, okay, thank you. I think that's dealt with the first theme. The second theme is place and environment. Councillor Pearce and Mr. Powell, do you want to say anything in respect to this part of the report?
Thank you, Chairman. Only to emphasise that they are what members themselves suggested at the workshop, and they've been tabulated, and some proposed way forward has been put against them. But like all the suggestions, they will need to be prioritised for strategic direction, costs and all the rest of it. So at the moment, this is just a very kind of, it's just an unsorted, if you like, summary.
Thank you. Councillor Mackay, do you want to, oh, so you've got a question, presumably this is a question on theme 2, is it? I don't want to go backwards. Is this theme 2, Councillor Mackay?
I think Councillor Callaghan wanted to speak first.
No, you're first. Oh, I got on the message board.
Okay, whatever. I mean, I have a question insofar that follows on from Councillor Abbott's statement that's been included. Presumably,
can I stop you?
It is relevant. So, presumably, this applies to all the themes. Presumably, we can add to this. This document is not. It was said right at the beginning that this is going to be an evolving document. It's not. Carved in stone as yet, and so I would like to understand the mechanism whereby we can contribute to this going forward, because it is a welcome document in many ways. It's got an awful lot of good ideas in it, I think. However, because of the way the workshops were constructed, it was very much officer-led, and there was an awful lot of things that could have gone into this document that never made it, just due to the way it was run and the matrices and the whole way it was run. Now, it worked insofar as it did a job, but it certainly didn't produce a comprehensive view. And one of the things that I think that comes out of all of this is that there's nothing that stitches it together. It's just a list of ideas, which is some of which are very good, as I keep saying. But what I would like to see is how this is all going to be stitched together. And with regard to Councillor Joseph Rose's comment about the green agenda, I see nothing in this that underpins it, which guides the council in a strategic direction which satisfied the climate change agenda. What I would like to see underpinning all of this is a move towards a green economy, and how that is going to work, and how the various business initiatives, the business forums, and the fact that we're engaging with businesses now is a wonderful thing, and that's something that should have been happening a long time ago, and that goes back to the very first time I ever opened my mouth in this council to do with the asset-based community development, etc., etc. Seeing these initiatives starting to take shape is very encouraging, but there is no strategic direction, and what I would like to see, and this goes back to my first question, which I wasn't allowed to, which I understand procedurally wasn't correct, but was why is it that there is no body in the council that has the portfolio for climate change and biodiversity? Other councils do this. I see no reason why there shouldn't be somebody on the executive that is there specifically to carry that agenda forward, and so that's part of why these themes by themselves are somewhat meaningless, because it lacks any direction, and that's what I would like to see changed. So my question is, how are we going to feed into this in the future? This can't possibly be the end of it, surely.
Councillor Pearce and Mr. Powell, could you answer the question, please?
Councillor Pearce, would you like me to pick that one up?
Well, Drew, I'll have a stab at it, and you can add what you want to add. First of all, the climate change portfolio is mine, as is the biodiversity one. And I repeat that what we have here is what was collated from the workshop. The strategic direction, that is the job of the executive, and that will be coming forward in the executive report, which will be the summary of what we do this morning, or what you do this morning, collated into a more strategic form for the report that goes to the executive at the end of the month. And that will be further refined when it comes back to you in November. So I think that by November, you will start seeing a lot more strategic direction than you have got in this collation of things that were said at the workshop. Drew, do you want to add to that at all?
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Yeah, I think that summarises the position. I think what we've tried to do with the report, and I know we're on the action plan, but 7.2 sets out the objectives that members agreed around recovery and renewal. And 3 of those were quite operational. They're about bringing services back online, about ensuring members were involved with decisions, and so on. But the 4th one was about the principle of build back better. The workshops, which were very much led by the exec members, have pulled together a load of actions. We've tried to refine those down without taking anything out, so we've got a true representation of what members have said, and then we're trying to screen that into something that does become more strategic, and I totally agree with that. But those strategic objectives need to be pulled out of a myriad of different proposals, and the task and finish groups picking up on consultation and engagement, on clusters and localities, and on business will I hope pull out some of those strategic objectives alongside obviously the work of the executive. So there's no doubt there needs to be a strategic framework around this, but we've started with what the members thought were important in terms of dealing with the immediate issues of recovery. Some of them will be dealt with in clearly those acute issues within this financial year, and as set out in the action plan, others are going to be medium and longer term. So hopefully that sets a better context for where we are.
It doesn't answer the question about how we can add to and feed further information into possible actions that should be considered and included. Councillor Abbott has a struggle to get one sentence put in. It seems to have been quite a palaver just to get that put in. How are we going to contribute to this action plan? Surely the workshops were not the beginning and end of the interaction with members. We still need further input into this and in an ongoing way, basically.
Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as I said, there, the report sets out a number of vehicles which will be member task and finish groups or working groups, which will develop on the key things within this work. So there will clearly be opportunities for members to influence how those key areas move forward. A lot of the other actions are sort of operational, let's get on and do them actions, which is why they've been allocated to officers. So I certainly don't see that this has been the end of member input to the recovery plan. And clearly, if this emerges and moves forward towards a new set of corporate priorities and a corporate strategy, then obviously the full membership will be involved in that development.
Okay, thank you. Can I just remind members we're on theme 2, and we've already dealt with theme 1 and the issues arising out of the report. So the next speaker is Councillor Rose.
Isn't it me, John?
Oh, sorry,
sorry,
Councillor Callaghan. Sorry, I apologise. Councillor Rose can stand down, then Councillor Callaghan. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Rose, but just wanted to totally agree with Councillor McKay on the importance of the overarching green agenda, and that's obviously this theme 2 relates to that. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of items, 2.6 and 2.7 on the natural environment, because they are items which may be seen as minor by some, but which would provide almost immediate transformation for residents to see at no cost or very little cost. We've been talking about budgets. It's the importance of changing mindsets and not budgets, and not having clipped lawns, nature take charge a little bit more than we do, and not having astroturf and all the rest of it. It also involves education for people on the importance of nature and not sticking astroturf patches in their back gardens and the like. It can be done quickly. It is rather tentative the way 2.6 is phrased. Could we increase wildflower spaces? Well, we can and we should. And we should be mowing less frequently. And I see it's short term, which is good. So I hope this can be done, and I hope people will support it. The council should also be protecting wildlife corridors, as in 2.7. I look down to see. I'm surprised any of this is in the medium term. I would hope it could be in the short term. Identifying opportunities, for example, to increase the number of trees is down as medium term. I would hope that could be short term. We've already in Kingsbridge got people looking at planting orchards locally, mini orchards, and that's a great thing to do. So I would hope that we can treat this as we've declared a climate emergency, and that we treat it as an emergency which has to be surely short term and not medium term. So I would encourage members to support these measures, as I'm sure you all do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Chairman. I hadn't really planned to ask this question, but it just suddenly popped into my head that it's actually quite relevant to this, which is that, as Councillor Pearce knows, we've been in some communication about a local economist who's actually an expert in circular and regenerative economics, and how that also applies into many of the themes that are many of these 5 or possibly 6 themes that are represented here, and what it kind of led me to think, and perhaps for him it's more specifically around theme 1, but that in this planning process, because we're in such unprecedented times, having to make changes that nobody could have foreseen necessarily, and that certainly we're not necessarily equipped to deal with, because these are new times. So I've been in a lot of communication with Jay Tompt, who's a local economist, and hearing from him all of the very cutting edge, pioneering kinds of activities and models that are being formed as we speak on the ground, people looking at how to actually implement effective solutions to the issues that we're seeing, both economically, environmentally, and socially. So I'm wondering, how can we be harnessing this expert advice into this planning process? Because the temptation is to just carry on going as we've always gone and use the knowledge and expertise that we have kind of in-house and on hand, which is fantastic. But I just really feel like if we're not opening up to the knowledge that is being developed, in direct response to the need of people who've dedicated their whole lives to doing that, then we're really missing a trick. So I would really love to see opportunities for, it could be for member workshops, it could be even just be for officer workshops, it could be workshops for specific task and finish groups like the Climate and Biodiversity task and finish group. But I would just love to see some of these experts who have so many of the answers that we're really needing to see represented in these planning documents, to be coming in as we're forming these plans and actually giving their expert advice at this point rather than later down the line. So I'm just, I guess this is a question for Councillor Pearce. It could be specifically around, bringing in Jay Tompt and these and people like him. But I guess this could also be for any other officers who are involved in this planning. But how are we utilising the expert advice on the ground that we don't have in-house? And if we're not doing that, how could we do that in the short term so that it can be incorporated into our planning process? Thank you.
Councillor Pearce, would you like to respond, please?
Yes, Chairman. I'll say to Councillor Rose that I've got Janice trying to organise a meeting with Jay this morning for me, and we'll take it from there.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pearce. And would that, would that also be open then to other people? So, for example, we're on theme 2 here, environment and placemaking. But how else are we encouraging, or how open are we to bringing in other experts who could really shed some light and fresh angles on some of these issues that we're dealing with. Thank you.
What I've asked her to set up is an initial meeting, and we'll take it from there, and I will then talk to Drew Powell about it, and we'll decide on the best way of taking it forward from there.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, there's 3 points I just wanted to discuss. 2.5, which is in the built environment. In terms of shared spaces, as many people will be aware, there's been a lot of conversation going on and expectations of shared space being developed in Totnes at the moment. But it seems that, you know, what's been described here is about what's going on in the public realm areas, which is very good, but it would be really good maybe to see that slightly broadened, because when you actually create more of a shared space in the actual highways themselves and on the pavements, it gives that more of a sense anyway. People just sort of apparently suddenly randomly using sort of like the Civic Square in Totnes, which could be a bit bleak if it didn't have any planters and things. I just would be really pleased to see more support within the district council for towns such as Totnes trying to do this at the moment, who quite frankly just haven't even been getting proper answers. They're buying the planters, they've got all sorts of things ready to go, and they can't just get the thumbs up from Devon County Council. And it'd be really good to see South Ham supporting town councils who are kind of investing and ready to go. So just to make that point, and I think it's as I say, it's not just about planters even, it's about looking at pedestrianised times, which can make it much more pleasant, so you haven't got cars blitzing past you if you are sitting out on these public spaces. Reducing speeds is another one, and of course access, where people are using sort of areas for rat runs rather than just actually genuine access to just pop and shop. So I think those would be really good to see, that kind of maybe slightly spread out to what shared space is all about and how it can make a real difference. And I think we'd find, I know Ivy Bridge, I think we've been looking at it in some of Kingsbridge, so I think it'd be quite interesting if we could start to really support the town councils who want that support with their district, with their applications to county. On 2.6 on the natural environment in terms of wildflower spaces, in kind of blank columns on in column 2 is in blank spaces, and we can work with the climate and bioactive at the climate and biodiversity emergency action plan groups that are springing up all around the South Hams. I mean, in my ward, for example, obviously Totnes, but there's Staverton and Dartington. They've all declared climate emergencies. Staverton's doing a huge amount of work as a local parish on coming up with plans, and I think that's something that could actually be in there, because that's that initiative about wildflower spaces is something that would give us the tuning down to that very local level, which is really where the small bugs actually really do operate. So I think that could be really good. And also we could increase in there our support with our work with Devon County Council. For example, I know that Rob Secured, for example, is part of the local nature partnership, and they are doing an awful lot as well, working with Devon County Council. So I think those are kind of people that we could name in as the partnerships, because as I say, they are sort of like Devon County Council has got a whole thing about greening up the verges and improving the verges and not cutting them so much, and it also saves money as well. And I think there's one thing we could encourage in column 3 is actually sort of obviously giving good example by making Fullerton Arboretum maybe a bit more of a wildlife area. I mean, it's pretty good already, but not cutting the grass quite the same. But also the cemeteries. I know that Fullerton Cemetery is, through the town council, is getting some wildlife mixes coming in there, and I think those sharing the examples, but also encouraging others where there's things like cemeteries, which are really easy wins. And then just finally onto active travel section 2.12. about the Team Devon will seek government support of 1.83 million. Well, that's absolutely music to my ears, because some of you might be aware that I've been trying to get active travel measures that we discussed at detail at Traffic and Transport Forum for Totnes and District to try and get those through at Devon County Council. And all Devon County Council is doing at the moment is we're looking for the government grants for what it's already got in its multi-trail usage, and the closest it gets to here is Newton Abbot. So I think this would be, to identify it as any Devon community with a population over 1,100 is brilliant, because that really would give us the linkages, and there's a whole load of schemes already linked up. So again, I would say in terms of that, who to work with, I would say again work with anywhere within the town and parish councils, but also the Totnes District Traffic and Transport Forum has existed now for at least 12 years to my knowledge, and there's a whole lot of schemes in there that could be sort of looked at, supported, and maybe looked for how they could replicate elsewhere, which I think would be benefiting right across Southampton and West Devon. That's me.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Right, I've got no other questions or members wishing to speak on theme 2. So if we could now move to theme 3, which is residents, communities and partnerships. Councillor Pearce, Mr. Powell, do you want to say anything before I open it for questions?
Chairman, no, I have no particular remarks to make about this one. And I'd be interested to hear what members think, or if they have any further thoughts, any late thoughts that they think weren't included or they've thought of since. But I think it's
thank you.
a fairly comprehensive roundup of what was discussed at the meeting.
Okay, so do members have any questions or comments on theme 3? No. Well, in that case, we'll move to theme 4, which is service recovery and redesign. Okay.
Call is not available at the moment. Please leave a message after the tone.
Oh.
When you've finished recording, please hang up.
Right. Councillor Pearce, do you want to say anything at all about on theme 4?
Again, Chairman, it is a summary of what was suggested at the meeting. I think probably this is the least populated grid, mainly because members didn't come up with an awful lot of suggestions, but I think that this is probably the area which, with Councillor Baldry's agreement, could be added to by the research which has come from officers themselves on service recovery and design, on redesigning services, and how they think from the experience of the pandemic so far is the best way of moving forward. I hope that Mr. Powell would agree with that.
Yes. Councillor Baldry.
No, thank you, Chairman. I'm quite happy, like Councillor Pearce, to hear what members have got to say. I might then go and say something after that.
Okay, thank you. Do members have any questions or comments on theme 4? No. In that case, we'll move to theme 5. Councillor Pearce.
Well, again, I have little to say on this because they are member suggestions. I know that one thing I would like to see is a redesign of the Constitution so that it's much easier to follow it online. And I think it would make it much more user-friendly for members to get familiar with the terms of the Constitution and therefore maybe be able to suggest changes. But I think that's a prerequisite to all this governance work. But there is quite a lot here, and it's going to be quite a big job to sort it out.
Okay, thank you. So there is a proposal from Councillor Abbott that's on the screen, but before we move on to that, have members got any questions or comments other than those relating to Councillor Abbott's proposals? No. In that case, Councillor Abbott, would you like to speak to your proposal, please?
Thank you. This is just an idea which means it might free up a little bit of space at Fullerton House. I might be preempting Steve Molyneux a bit on this, and because he hasn't had time to respond to the idea, and he might like to come in and debate this because he'll have done some research on it. But it seems to me that there is no problem with the COVID virus after 3 days, and whereas it's very expensive to clean before and after table use in a cafe, people are going around all the time cleaning up after clients. If we just leave a room unused for 3 days, and both before and after, it means we could use some of the rooms in Fullerton House and we could get together. Of course, only with enough spacing. And I've spoken before about being reticent about getting together with you or others, as indeed you'll have your own reticence about the possibility of picking this disease up. And so we would be spaced. So therefore we couldn't meet in the council chamber as the plan says with us all attending. It wouldn't work. But there are some small meetings where it would do, and I think it would give a bit of flexibility. So I just propose this as maybe an insight into how we understand the disease and how we cope with it.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce, do you want to respond? As not only as on the exec, but also chair of the accommodation working group. Am I right in saying you are the chair, aren't you?
I'm not chair. I believe that Councillor Hopwood is in Councillor May's
I do apologise.
absence. I'm taking his place, but I think But I would like to point out that this is not so much an accommodation matter as an operational matter, and therefore I would like Mr. Molyneux to reply to it if anybody's going to.
Okay.
Unless Councillor Hopwood's got something to say, I'm not precluding her, but I think it's Mr. Molyneux's position.
Right.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pearce. I agree.
Thank you. Mr. Molyneux.
Thank you. I mean, in terms of operationally, I've passed this on to Chris Brook and Laura Watton, who is the head of assets. We're constantly assessing the government guidance in terms of how we can basically make the offices safe and secure. And I think, we wouldn't discount this as an option. Whether we need to actually put it in or not in the actual action plan, I'm not sure. But in terms of, is it an opportunity to consider? Absolutely it is. I'm actually in the office today because I had no other place to work from today, and I'm the only officer in the building, and the only other person I've seen is the cleaner who's been around cleaning light switches and the like. I think it's something we will absolutely consider and take into account that members would like to be able to do meetings. The issue is likely to be the capacity of the meeting rooms. So to give you an example, the sort of the Carey and Repton room where we do these committees in the past, where we can accommodate 45 people, we're looking at maybe 12 people maximum. So yeah, it would give the opportunity for some member meetings, but it would be limited, and it would involve extra cleaning to a degree. So, but we can consider it. But I would almost want to do it in conjunction with the accommodation working group. Would be my take.
Mr. Molyneux, would you be happy then if Councillor Abbott was to insert the words at the beginning of this paragraph, consider utilising the 3-day fallow period?
I'm happy with that, yeah.
Yes. Councillor Abbott, would you be happy with that?
Yes, that's all right. The only reason that I'm proposing it at all, instead of just letting things develop, is that the box currently says an assessment of the council chamber has been undertaken, blah, blah, blah. Currently, it would not be possible to hold our committee meetings within this space. And you see, that's quite such a different line to take, that it says to anyone who reads this, we can't meet there at all, whereas actually, yeah, maybe we could, and consider is fine.
Well, I mean, we certainly wouldn't be in a position to hold, just from the distancing guidelines, we wouldn't have enough capacity to hold a full council meeting in any of the rooms.
No.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Pannell.
Yeah, I'd just like to support Councillor Abbott's suggestion. Quite understand that, yeah, we can't have full council meetings, but we could have some committee meetings. And I know Councillor Brazil is keen that if possible, we go back to holding development management in the council chamber. I'm sure there are some working parties or committee meetings that we could hold in the council chamber, and smaller working groups could meet in the committee rooms as suggested. Just from personal experience, our church, I suspect, like many others, is open 2 days a week, Sundays and Wednesdays, and that's with the blessing of our vicar, who is not just a vicar but was formerly Deputy Chief Medical Officer for England. So she has some clout there, and she is content with the 3-day rule, which is why we've set those 2 dates. So I think we could easily be utilising some of our space 2 days a week if they were spaced out as suggested.
Okay, thank you. Can I just remind members that in looking at the theme is that this is the responsibility for taking this forward is with the accommodation working group. So what is being proposed is that that working group consider, etc. So Mr. Molyneux, would you want it?
You've covered you've covered the point I was just about to make, Councillor Birch. Thank you.
Right. So, Councillor Austin.
Yeah, are we technically able to hold hybrid meetings for any official meetings that we hold? Because if we aren't, then we could actually be just debating something we aren't possible to do, because it wouldn't be possible for us to actually do hybrid meetings if we can't actually be allowed to do that. Perhaps one of the officers could answer that question.
Mr. Molyneux, can you answer that question?
I'm being told that we can't do hybrid meetings at the moment.
Okay.
So the point there, Chair, is if we can't do hybrid meetings, then we can't do what is in the recommendation.
Yes, well, what is being asked is for this to be considered by the accommodation working group. It's not a firm proposal. It's for them to consider, and I'm sure they'll take that into account. Right, I was hoping that, Councillor Hotwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm listening to what members are saying, and I think we will look at all the proposals and all the suggestions when the accommodation working group meets next, and I'm keen for that meeting to happen relatively soon. So we will take everything that's been said this morning into consideration.
Thank you. So members, you're being asked to include within the action plan that the accommodation working group consider the measures as set out in Councillor Abbott's proposal. Is there any member who objects to this and wishes us to move to the vote? If there's no one objecting to it, then we'll proceed on the basis that it is carried. Mr. White, there doesn't appear to be a response. I'm just checking it.
Exactly right, Chair. I'm just checking, and no one appears to be typing in the bar. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So are there any other comments or questions on theme 5? No, sorry, we're on, yes, on theme 5. So next is theme 6, which is financial stability. Councillor Pearce, do you want to say a few words?
Chairman, only to say that this has largely been covered by the budget item, although fusion and lobbying government are also part of this theme. But to me, this underpins all the other actions, because if we don't have financial stability, it's going to be very difficult to move ourselves forward in any meaningful way. So this is absolutely key to what the council needs to achieve.
Thank you. Do any members have comments or questions?
Yes, Councillor Pennington.
Councillor Pennington, would you like to say?
I believe this to be the most important item on the agenda today. And in particular, I would just like to ask questions and comment. Government lobbying for extra funding is absolutely 120% vital. No question about that at all. We've got to do it, and we've got to get it. And then service, obviously 6.4, service delivery, that's important. And then I come on to leisure provision, that's important. Now, but particularly also 6.6, review of statutory as versus discretionary expenditure. We've got to adapt to this. And in particular, I go back to what I've always said as a councillor on finance. We do what is essential. We've got to. It's usually statutory. We also try to do what is necessary, which may or may not be statutory. And then we come to what is desirable. And there are things that we do on this council which are desirable, but which we do not have to do, and we do not always need to do. And there should be more finance, in my view, coming from the private sector on desirable activities in this particular scenario we are in now. Because we've got to look at the various things in a different way to what we have done before. And desirable activities, desirable as they may be, we've got to decide whether we can afford them or not under these circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Pennington. Okay, there doesn't seem to be any other questions or comments, so that being the case, we'll move back to the recommendations on the main report. The recommendations 1 to 5. First of all, could I ask if there's for a member to propose and a member to second the...
Happy to propose, Chairman.
Seconded.
Thank you. I've got also Councillor Hodgson proposing. There are 2 proposed additions rather than amendments to the recommendation being put forward by Councillor Brazil. So, Mr. White, could you put the there on the screen? Councillor Brazil, would you like to speak to these proposed additions to the recommendations?
Yes, thank you, John. Yes, item 6. I think John Mackay mentioned this, and this is really that how members will keep control over what's going on as far as the recovery is concerned, as this council is concerned, because my fear is that most of it is being led by teams that have absolutely no councillors on them at all, and they just need to be overseen by elected members, because there is a slight tension that members are there to fight for their local communities, and officers tend to look towards the council first and community second. In my view, and I think we've seen that in item 8 above. So really, this is just a way of making sure that elected members have the ultimate control over the direction and means of the recovery from this council. And item 7 again is just really bringing into account how a proper explanation, a formal, well, although it's asked in an informal meeting of members, so that we can ask questions of Team Devon and how they expect to take forward the proposals which are seen as solutions to some of the issues that are raised within the recovery plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for these additional recommendations? If there's not,
Chairman, I'm happy to second that.
Oh, I say thank you very much indeed. So also that's fine. Okay, so there is before you members and 2 additional recommendations. Do any members wish to speak on the recommendations? No. If that is the case, then can we move to the vote? And perhaps I could ask first if there are any members who do not support these additional recommendations, if they could indicate in the message board. So Councillor Austin, you're against. Okay. That being the case, then we'll move to the vote. Can Mr. White, can I ask you to start the voting process, please?
Thank you, Chair. Before I do, I'm conscious again, members, that Councillor Pennington won't have seen these additional recommendations being on the phone. So if I just read out what we're voting on first, Chair. So Councillor Pennington, we have 2 additional recommendations, which is, if we start with little number 6, it reads as follows: that the joint meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel Development Management Committee recommends to full council that a member working group be formed to oversee the work of the responsible team, group, strategy, specifically the recovery management team. The remit of this working group is to set priorities and direct officers accordingly. This group to become effective immediately following the full council meeting on the 24th of September 2020. So that's the new proposed 6, and new proposed 7 reads as follows: that the joint meeting of the ONS-DM committee invites a representative and relevant officer from Team Devon to an informal meeting of all members to set out its plans and actions in respect of all those items listed in Appendix 1 to the report as being its initial responsibility for instigation. So at this time, members, we're just having a named vote on those 2 parts as additional recommendations. Thanks, members.
Thank you.
So therefore, Councillor Abbott.
For.
Councillor Austin.
Against.
Councillor Birch.
For.
Councillor Brazil. Councillor Brazil.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor Chown.
Against.
Councillor Foss.
Against.
Councillor Hodgson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Holway.
Against.
Councillor Jackson.
For.
I believe Councillor Kemper's left the call. So Councillor Long.
For.
Councillor McKay.
For.
Councillor Callahan.
For.
Councillor Pannell.
For.
Councillor Pennington.
For.
Councillor Pringle.
Against.
Councillor Reeve.
Against.
Councillor Rose.
For.
Councillor Rowe.
Against.
Councillor Smurden.
Against.
And Councillor Taylor.
Against.
Thank you, members. That's therefore 11 votes in favour and 10 votes against. So those additions are therefore included in the substantive motion. Thank you, members. I think you're on mute there, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Pearce, you've got a point of order.
Yes, I have, Chairman. Is Overview and Scrutiny able to recommend to Council, or can it only recommend to the Executive?
No, I've been advised that it can make recommendations to Council.
That's correct, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Yes. Right. Okay. So we now move to the recommendation as amended with the 2 additions. Do any members wish to speak, or can I move to the vote on this? Okay, so I would ask if there is any member who wishes to oppose the recommendation that has been amended, and if so, they indicate in the message board. No. In that case, the recommendation on the paper plus the 2 additions, that is carried. Is that correct, Mr. White?
Thank you, Chair. That's correct. And just to reiterate, another couple of seconds have gone by. There's no member indicating that they're typing in the bar to the contrary.
Thank you. It's 12:03, and I think we've just completed the meeting. So thank you very much indeed, members. And you can have the afternoon off, as it was in your diary originally.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
bye.
you, Chairman. Thank you for chairing the meeting. Thank you.